The letter was released on the 25th of July 2017 and was developed and published by Yang Yang Mobile. The game is a horror visual novel where you play as multiple characters and make choices that affect the story. The story goes, a group of people get cursed and are hunted by a ghost of a woman with long black hair that makes clicking noises and... wait. This sounds oddly similar to something else. I can't quite put my finger on it. Okay, so the premise of the story is nothing unique, it's something that's been done many times before. So what makes the letter unique and worth your time? The biggest draw of this game is the characters. The main cast is amazingly well written. Characters feel like human beings with strengths and flaws and play off each other very well. They're not simply plot devices to push the cliched story forward. The story deals with the characters in the situation and their relationships. They do occasionally fall into the character does dumb thing in horror trope, but not to any major extent, especially since, you know, you're the one making most of their choices for them, so it's on you whether or not to choose life or death for them. Well, guess I'll die. Gameplay wise, it's a VN, so lots and lots and lots of reading, and looking at pretty pictures. Wow, this one's really beautiful. The artwork on this is amazing. What in the actual f***? You'll also be making choices that can change how the story progresses, from decisions that can affect your relations with other characters, to choices that can affect the flow of the story entirely, to choices that determine if the character will end up as a mangled mess of guts and bones. Well, that's a damn shame. Each chapter has multiple endings as well as multiple overall endings for the game that are determined by the relationships between characters, the choices you make during the game, and who is still alive by the end of the game. These can range from happy to downright depressing depending on how you played. There is a ridiculous amount of outcomes to the point that after playing the game for so long, I'm still nowhere close to seeing everything. It's very intricate with the choices you make in previous chapters cascading down into the later ones until the end. I want to look at each chapter and character in more detail to explain how Yang Yang Mobile managed to use a not so original idea and make it a very engaging story to play through. Isabella is an employee at Briar Realty Corporation and, along with her friend and co-worker Rose, is trying to sell the infamous Ermengarde mansion. During an inspection of the property, she finds the titular letter in an attic and is attacked by a horrific ghost. After falling down some stairs, she blacks out and then an awesome animated intro plays. So thus, the game begins. Isabella is an energetic, positive person and shines so brightly she is the literal sun to some people, but she's also a bit naive and flusters easily. Being the most superstitious of the group, she's quick to freak out about the letter. Also, being attacked by a walking corpse probably didn't do much to help her psyche. And when others start to see the letter as well, she believes they are now cursed, and she makes it her goal to save her friends and others from being brutally murdered. The thing I like is that she is proactive in trying to find a solution even when others pass her off as being unreasonable. Think of her as the pseudo-protagonist of the story. Her chapter is the trigger for the rest of the game and has some of the biggest impact on the later chapters. She is far from the most complex character, but she is endearing and you do want to see her succeed in her goal and have a happy ending with her friends. Unless you don't, you utter psychopath. There are 3 different endings to Isabella's chapter that aren't too hard to get, but, and this is a big but, knowing what choices to make that will trigger which ending is tough, as it's not always as clear as you might think. Not to spoil too much, she has one ending where she lives, one where she dies, and one that, well, there's a hint in the intro to what can potentially happen to her, and I don't want to ruin the surprise. Her endings and certain choices causes major changes throughout the rest of the chapters, and her chapter is a strong start to the rest of the game. Hannah Wright is the wife of Luke Wright and is absolutely freaking loaded. After hearing about the Ermengarde mansion...
The Ermengarde mansion?
Yes, that one. From Officer Lee, her interest is piqued and she decides to drag her husband to the open house the next day. She also hires Marianne McCullough to be her interior designer on the new home. Be before she even actually bought the mansion. This chapter's main focus is on Luke and Hannah's troubled relationship, and Hannah struggles to be seen as more than just Luke Wright's wife. It's revealed that Hannah used to be a finance manager and worked her way up her father's company to get that position before marrying Luke. This chapter showcases the brilliant writing in the game, as when you meet Hannah in Chapter 1, she comes across as a stereotypically rich woman who has lived in luxury her whole life, at least through Isabella's eyes, that is. When you actually play as Hannah, however, you see a much smarter and loving woman who is trying her best to keep her marriage alive. Hannah is one of my favourites. She is very kind, compassionate, and strong-willed. However, her privileged upbringing does mean that she can be a bit aloof at times, and she will use her money to get her way if needed. She's basically that celebrity you think is a dumbass but is actually a really smart person and just does things for publicity. Being in the public eye a lot has made her begin to act certain ways to keep up her appearance. She even admits at one stage that she's not as dumb as she acts, which I thought was a brilliant way to explain her character. Hannah has 3 different endings, with one of them having 2 variations. Guessing all of her endings is a little more complex than making choices at the end of her chapter. She has one where she lives, and one where she dies, and one that is a spoiler, but makes things very interesting for the rest of the playthrough if you get it. If you're struggling to get her endings, here's a hint. You need to make a certain choice in Chapter 1 to potentially trigger one of them, and her other ending involves a choice about halfway through the chapter. This is probably the most complex of the chapters, and again has far-reaching impacts on the rest of the game. Zach is a freelance photographer currently doing work for Luxury Living and just so happens to be covering the Wrights and the Ermengarde mansion. He is best friends with Ashton, and despite his towering stature, he is a gentle giant with a heart of gold. Zach is that ridiculously reliable guy who is always there to lend a hand or an ear and cook your food when you need it. He also apparently plays guitar, giving him some holy trinity of the perfect boyfriend. However, he is fighting his own demons due to a horrific incident when he was a child that still haunts him today, and can sometimes act without thinking. Zach's story is a way to bridge the gap between some of the characters who don't interact with each other, as a lot of his choices will bring him closer to either his group of friends or to Hannah. Zach's story also deals with racism, as shown through the movie he has produced for a film festival. It's a tough subject to tackle and also leads into his own backstory, but it's done very well. His story isn't as impactful as the previous 2, but still can cause quite a stir for the last few chapters. Zach has only 2 different endings, one where he lives and one where he dies. The difference here is that one of the endings has variations, depending on the ending you got for Chapter 2. It has the same outcome overall, but changes the aspects of the ending. His chapter is heavily affected by Chapter 1, and your playthroughs can be very different. This chapter shows how events play out on the same day through others' eyes, and really shows how your choices change the story. Zach's chapter is kind of the start of slightly more streamlined, slightly might be the wrong choice of wording, chapters that either have life or death endings as opposed to a third option. Marianne is an interior designer who is contracted by the Wrights to work on the Ermengarde mansion. She is highly regarded for her work and is very professional, and has horrible traumatic visions of a dead girl. When she's not with her clients or working in her apartment, she's generally at the Galway Shoal parading Irish stereotypes, and accidentally almost courting one of her clients. Marianne is a very independent person with amazing work ethic, but has some very self-destructive tendencies as well. This chapter is very focused on having an outside look on the Wrights and the curse as a whole, as Marianne doesn't interact with the rest of the cast a lot besides small segments. A good chunk of her chapter is influenced by her relationship with Luke and Hannah, and isn't really affected too much by the previous chapters. This makes this chapter the weakest one of the game, which is unfortunate because Marianne is a very good character. You delve deep into her backstory as her old wounds are brought back up. This chapter is very open about sexuality, as we see that Lorraine, aka Dead Girl, was in love with Marianne. However, Marianne thought it was wrong and sinful, and, well, Lorraine didn't take the rejection too well. One thing I will say is that this chapter does start to make you ask some questions about the ghost and the cursed, and depending on the ending you can get, can give some very interesting revelations. Marianne only has 2 endings that both have minor variations depending on one of the choices you make. You can boil a lot of this one down to trying to impress your favorite right, which is a shame since this only impacts endings specifically with her. It's like a side story that interweaves into the main plot but just doesn't quite get there at times. I love Marianne as a character and certainly don't hate this chapter, but I do feel like it is the weakest part of the overall game. Rebecca is a high school teacher at St. Goretti's and is Isabella's neighbor and best friend. She's also had a crush on Ashton for a ridiculous amount of time and is probably one stabbing away from going full yandere on you. Seriously, this obsession can't be healthy. Did I mention she's also a master of book fu? Luke can attest to this. Ow! She's a very caring person who is basically the mother of the group, but she can also be very...
What's my problem? You're the one who has a problem here!
Intense at times, to put it nicely. Also, I noticed she seems to be the one that spends the most amount of time on her phone and... hold on, one sec. Who could this be?
Can you hear me?
Now, Becca's chapter goes back to the everything you have done until now affects the story in big ways, so be ready for potential nightmare fuel if you've been a sadistic person and murdered everyone. The main people you interact with in this chapter are Isabella, Ashton, and Luke. In a weird thing of hitting on Luke but also having a deep-rooted fascination with Ash, it basically forces you into a shipping war with yourself. What I love about this chapter in particular is you get to see another point of view on Luke's character and the awkward but sweet relationship the two can form. This time there isn't an overly tragic backstory, unless keeping your feelings for a guy to yourself for 17 years can be considered traumatic, but you do learn of her childhood with Ashton and why they are so close. It's a nice story of friendship. Like Zach's chapter, there are 2 endings, with one ending again having a variation depending on how you finish chapter 2. There are also some major clues and revelations that can come up if you make the right choices. Also, one of the students at St. Goretti's may or may not be a demon spawn, but that's okay, it's just a phase, I swear. Ashton is a detective for the Luxbourne police working on a big case involving Luke Wright. He's part of the Fantastic Four group of friends and has a major crush on Isabella that he fails miserably at hiding. Aw, he blushing. Ashton is the most skeptical of the group and is the first to dismiss Bella's claims. But when strange occurrences and potentially the gruesome deaths of those around him start happening, how long can he deny the curse? He's a very distant person who tends to keep a lot to himself due to not wanting his friends in danger, but he's quick-witted and very knowledgeable. It's like he stepped out of a crime novel, but instead of fantastical adventures, it's red tape and cold cases. Ashton's chapter is massive. It spans across many of the days in the game and has a lot of interactions with most of the cast. He also has a lot of story changes depending on the endings of all the previous chapters. There are a ton of tangents and combinations of the story nodes that can come up here. Did you kill Isabella and Zach but keep Becca alive? Or are all 3 of them alive and ready to help? It's kinda crazy how different the story is in this chapter. Ashton's character can shift and change as well. He becomes overprotective of the survivors and feels guilty if he's not able to save those who have died. He becomes increasingly desperate to find a solution to save everyone, but can end up alienating his friends as he won't reveal his plans in order to stop them from getting hurt. So when it comes to his endings, he has a grand total of 2. But there are 4 variations for one, and the other one has multiple tiny variations depending on who is still alive by this time in the game. The ending leaves in a cliffhanger for the finale, and boy what a finale it is. Also, he has one of the most stressful and scary QTEs in the game. Luke Wright is the bastard son of a wealthy businessman and a prostitute, and is now the current head of his father's company. But underneath the facade of a well-balanced member of society lies a man who will do anything for power and profit. Luke is...
How the hell did you get in here?
Luke is...
God and Bennett, only a Nancy would knock at such an ungodly hour.
Luke is...
If I've died to this bloody case, I'm taking you all down with me!
A very complicated man. He switches from being an actually decent human being to being a mustache-twirling villain in seconds. He's a very complex character and is written extremely well. You interact with Luke in all chapters, and you get very different views on his character through the other's eyes. Ashton sees him as a horrid criminal, Rebecca sees him as a man who hides who he really is, and Hannah sees him as a somewhat loving husband that just needs some work, blinding herself to the evil deeds he has done. I think that's one thing that needs to be made very clear before I go any further. Luke is not a good person. He has and will do horrible things to get his way and is proud of it. Manipulating others, fraud, murder, he has done it all. And yet he can become very endearing depending on how you play. He's an enigma of a character. Somehow he can be undeniably unforgivable, and also extremely likable. But in saying that, it doesn't feel unnatural. It makes sense in the context of his character and backstory. It makes sense that he's paranoid of people and overprotective of Hannah. He puts his trust in his lackeys, but also makes sure he doesn't let his guard down around them. He might enjoy the presence of Mint and Daisy, but he still keeps his distance from them somewhat. I would love to keep talking about Luke. I could go on for hours, but I gotta get this wrapped up, and I'm trying to keep spoilers to a minimum here. I'll just say that be prepared to have very conflicting feelings about the man. Now, Luke's endings are a bit different in that it is the end of the game, and it basically depends on who is alive by this point. And they work a bit different than the other chapters. There are a number of variations to his endings, so in reality there is a bunch of ways the chapter can end. One quick thing to mention is the game does have a true ending, and here's a tip for you. Despite what you might think, keeping everyone alive will not trigger the true ending, so have fun figuring out what the heck you're supposed to do. Video games. It's cool to see the game end playing as a character like Luke, because it might not always mean a happy ending for all. So throughout the whole game, you'll also interact with various side characters. We have Johans, the Wright's head butler and Luke's right-hand lackey, Rose, Isabella's co-worker from BRC, Kylie, Luke and Hannah's godchild and part-time demon spawn, and Professor Andrew, Ashton and Becca's mentor. You'll learn just enough about these characters so that they feel like real people who have lives. Johans has a husband and 2 daughters, and Kylie has a friend named Takaka who likes to cry a lot. There's also Officer Lee, Father Norman, and G the bartender, and yes, they all look like the same person. That's the joke. The minor characters add a nice little touch to the story that makes the world feel lived in. So as much as I love this game, it's not perfect. Bugs aren't too prevalent in the game besides the occasional text or sprite glitch. Mainly the problems show up in the polish of the game. From about chapter 5, random lines of dialogue may not be voiced, which can be jarring at times, especially in the middle of conversations that have voice lines. Also, voice effects sometimes aren't present, like when someone is talking on the phone. They have been patching and working on fixing this, and it doesn't ruin the experience. If there is one thing I will say is that when I mentioned about the choices being overwhelming, it really can be. With the insane amount of combinations of choices and story nodes to unlock, it becomes a completionist's worst nightmare. Trying to unlock every node and ending can become tedious since you'll be playing through the game multiple times over and the same sections over and over again to unlock even slight changes in the story. It's not a deal breaker, but if you're not really into doing multiple playthroughs, then this may not be for you. So, to conclude, do I recommend the latter? Absolutely. If you like VNs and well-written characters, then you will love this game. It's got an amazing art style and killer music and can keep you busy for days. It's available on Steam, Android, and iPhone. And remember, your choices really do affect the story. Thank you so much for watching. Hello all, my name is Ebon Phantasma. If you've made it this far, then thank you so much for watching my first video for this channel. I've put a lot of time and effort into this. I'm still learning, and I'm definitely no expert on editing or making content in general. Any advice or constructive criticism is welcome. I'm always looking to improve. Let me know what you liked and what you didn't like about the video. Hopefully I will be able to work out a good structure to the content the further I go with this. I currently do this in my free time from work, so I don't have a lot of time to work on videos, but my current plan is to make some gameplay videos of random games and some more edited voiceover videos so that I can have somewhat consistent content. And before we go, I need to give a big shout out and thank you to the incredible Mickey Robbins P who made the intro and outro music for the channel. Please go check them out, they make amazing Vocaloid music, including Danganronpa fan songs, and they do commissions. I'll leave a link to their channel in the description. If you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe and share. I would love to grow this channel and continue to make content. Alright, about.